Tonight on War Stories, ISIS, ruthless in expanding their so-called Islamic State.
ISIS is hotwiring the apocalypse.
The Kurdish Peshmerga, fierce fighters standing against ISIS.
The Peshmerga are an incredible fighting force. Our efforts have been anemic so far.
ISIS propaganda calls for attacks in Europe and in America.
The threat is growing in terms of scale and scope.
Can ISIS be stopped?
It can be defeated and will be defeated.
That's next on War Stories. Welcome to this special edition of War Stories, coming to you from March Field in Riverside, California, home of the 452nd Air Mobility Wing. I'm Oliver North, and you're looking at a C-17 Globemaster, a workhorse asset in Operation Inherent Resolve and the fight against radical Islam on the ground. Joining me, a man who knows all about that fight on the ground, former U.S. Navy SEAL Leif Babin.
Thanks, Ollie. These aircraft are crucial in delivering combat troops and equipment to the battlefield in the fight against ISIS. And it was ISIS that inspired the attack in San Bernardino, about 20 miles from here, that killed 14 Americans and wounded 22 others.
No question, my mind or yours, we can beat them on the battlefield.
Absolutely.
The question is, can we defeat their ideology? 14 May 2015, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed caliph of ISIS, the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, calls for all Muslims to migrate to his caliphate or take up arms in their own country.
The terror alert raised to the highest level after bombings at the Brussels International Airport and a subway station in the heart of the capital.
We heard two very loud explosions. If anybody thought this wasn't their problem, they ought to recognize that it is all of our problem.
130 people of 27 nationalities were slaughtered in Paris.
First major attack on French soil since World War II. And around the same time, we had the attacks in Lebanon. We had the first downing of an airplane since 9/11. This all happened in a matter of weeks.
San Bernardino, California, where a husband and wife team had thousands of bullets and a stockpile of pipe bombs.
We've got investigations in all 50 states in America.
The horror will not end until our Muslim community wakes up.
There are some who say that ISIS is just one of these franchises from hell of radical Islam, that it's not really any different than Boko Haram or Al-Qaeda. Is radical Islam the real enemy, or is it just ISIS?
It's extremism in any form. It's extremism that challenges the American homeland, challenges the American people, and presents a risk to the lives of our partners and alliances as well.
After serving as 36th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Joe Dunford was appointed Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We first met in 2003 when he was a colonel, commanding Marine Regimental Combat Team 5 on the battlefield in Iraq. You've got probably more experience in this war than anybody I know. What has changed over the course of those years between 2003 and now?
Today we're probably dealing with a more virulent strain of extremism in the form of ISIL.
Is it something that can be contained and defeated?
It can be defeated, and it will be defeated, Ollie. It's going to require a couple of things. First, it's going to require us to deny sanctuary wherever it happens to be. It's going to require us to build the capacity of our partners so they can provide security with their own borders. It's going to require us to cut off their resources, to cut off the flow of foreign fighters, and to undermine the credibility of their narrative.
Undermining ISIS narrative isn't easy. As fast as one can push the send button, ISIS propaganda is spread on social media, highly produced horrific videos, and via their digital magazine, The Bic. ISIS claims, like all jihadists, to follow the path of Islam's founder, Muhammad, who established the first Islamic State, or caliphate, in the 7th century.
The most common misperception that I think a lot of people have about ISIS is, again, the one that they aren't Islamic. Unfortunately, ISIS is very Islamic.
Timothy Furnish has a PhD in Islamic history. He served as a U.S. Army Arabic specialist and has written numerous books on Islam, including his latest, Sex, Lies, and the Caliphate.
ISIS has the upper hand in terms of interpreting the Quran in many ways because they're simply interpreting it and applying it literally. And this makes it very hard to refute them. One of their favorite motifs is to quote hadiths alleged sayings of Muhammad. And the major one that they quote is a hadith about an Armageddon-like battle that will take place before the end of time at the town of Dabik in northern Syria, hence the name of the magazine. Like Al-Qaeda, ISIS never refers to us as Americans. We are crusaders. ISIS sees the United States as a Christian power, and that they will defeat the crusaders, who is us, and this will then bring about the eschatological end and the Islamic conquest of the world.
Wahhabi Islam, ISIS's Islam, takes 7th century Islamic interpretations and says that they are going to literally apply it to today.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser served 11 years as a medical officer in the U.S. Navy and was an attending physician to the U.S. Congress. He's a practicing Muslim and author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. After the 9/11 attacks, Dr. Jasser was disappointed with the Muslim American response and founded AIFD, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy.
This is not our Islam. We believe we need reform to get to the 21st century within our theological discourse. I see many Muslims being attracted to this idea of the Islamic State. The only thing that inoculated me against radicalization is my love for America, my love for liberty.
Yet ISIS continues to attract tens of thousands of foreign fighters, including Americans, intending to die for their cause. ISIS emerged from the terror group Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI.
The predecessor group to that was a group that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi started.
During Operation Iraqi Freedom, Abu Musab Zarqawi became the head of AQI, battling against the U.S.-led coalition forces on the streets of Fallujah, Ramadi, and Al-Qaim.
ISIS has been able to eclipse Al-Qaeda, I think, primarily by the fact that they rule a state. They're not hiding in caves and on the margins of the Islamic world.
And it didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be combated overnight.
Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally served 26 years in the U.S. Air Force, retiring as a colonel. With 6 deployments to the Middle East, including Iraq and Afghanistan, she holds the distinction of being the first female attack pilot to fly in combat and the first to command an A-10 squadron. McSally currently serves on the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees. War Stories sat down with her at Purple Heart Park in Tucson.
30,000 fighters that have flown from 100 different countries into Iraq and Syria. We know of 250 Americans and about 5,000 or so from Western countries. ISIS took over territory and declared a caliphate in June of 2014. ISIS owns territory in Iraq and Syria, about the size of Indiana. In addition, areas in Libya and other ungoverned spaces that they are trying to continue to expand to.
ISIS has all but erased the borders between Iraq and Syria that were drawn up after World War I by British and French diplomats Mark Sykes and Francois-Georges Picot.
The thrust of the strategy is got to be in cutting off their heads. They're cutting off individuals' heads. We got to cut off their head figuratively by their strength in their leadership and their territory in Iraq and Syria.
Up next, General Joe Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, joins us to lay out a path to victory. You'll also meet a very brave man running an underground railroad to save the helpless from ISIS terror. In the summer of 2014, ISIS grabbed the world's attention when the black-clad ISIS army suddenly charged out of its stronghold in Raqqa, Syria. ISIS rapidly seized thousands of square miles of territory, including Mosul, the second-largest city in Iraq. Iraqi government forces fled before the onslaught, and within weeks, ISIS overran most of Nineveh and Anbar provinces. Along the way, ISIS captured tens of thousands of heavy weapons, munitions, vehicles and military equipment the U.S. had provided to the Baghdad government. As their forces advanced, ISIS released brutal videos showing the beheadings of scores of captives, including American journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotloff. Finally, on 22 September, the president addressed the nation.
Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy.
The Obama administration's declared strategy included U.S. airstrikes in Iraq and Syria and special operators and advisors on the ground in Iraq. Many in Congress see his response to ISIS as inadequate.
Our efforts militarily have been anemic so far. We could have been using special operations and air power in a much stronger way in order to roll back ISIS capabilities and strengthen the more moderate elements. There can be really no solution in this region until we address the Assad issue.
We've got 60 countries that have said they're part of the coalition against ISIL. In truth, about 20 of them are providing effective military capabilities. And frankly, one of our focuses right now is to get our coalition partners to do more.
Do we have allies in the Middle East that will help us, not the Europeans, not NATO, but allies in the Middle East that can be helpful to us in this fight?
Jordan has been a good partner in this fight. Israel has been a good partner in this fight. The United Arab Emirates has been a good partner in this fight.
Another country that should be a partner in the fight against ISIS is a NATO member.
Turkey is a part of the effort to address the flow of foreign fighters, yet the vast majority of foreign fighters are flowing through Turkey into Syria, so they just need to do more. They need to do more to control their own border.
The Kurds are the only ones who have consistently beaten ISIS at every turn. Should we be doing more to help the Kurds?
I would tell you we are getting the support that they need in the current fight to them. We're doing it through the Iraqi government because what we're looking for in the long run is a multi-sectarian unified Iraq. We think that that's the best prospect of success.
Whether Iraq can survive as a unified Sunni Shiite Kurdish state is an open question. But there's no doubt the Islamic State is still, despite efforts to cut their financing, the richest terror organization on the planet.
They're able to fund their operations from extortion, kidnappings, the black market oil, selling of antiquities, robbing banks.
The U.S. Treasury Department estimates the Islamic State has brought in as much as $50 million a month selling oil on the black market.
We'll need to squeeze diplomatically the nations in the region to ensure that there is no black market for that oil to be sold.
Is this solution going to require tens of thousands of American troops on the ground in either Syria or Iraq?
My perspective is that long-term success is going to require effective indigenous forces on the ground for long-term stability. But I do believe that U.S. capabilities, unique U.S. capabilities, are going to be equally important for us to be successful.
But some say a ground war with the U.S. and European troops is exactly what ISIS wants.
I do think ISIS is dedicated to what in this sort of subfield we call hot wiring the apocalypse. I think the beheadings, the burnings, as with the Jordanian pilot last year, the horrible things that they do, I think that they are trying to spark a ground war.
The more that there is a war like this, the minorities have no place.
Reverend Majed El-Shafi is dedicated to rescuing religious minorities who are victims of oppression and genocide. In 2004, he founded One Free World International. El-Shafi converted from Islam to Christianity when he was 18 years old. He was imprisoned and tortured in an Egyptian prison for declaring his faith in Jesus Christ. So Christians and Jews and others like the Baha'i are caught in the crossfire.
That's correct.
Since 2014, in an effort to cleanse their caliphate, ISIS death squads have viciously murdered tens of thousands of Christians and Yazidis in northern Iraq. Most captured men and boys were eliminated, but thousands of young women and girls have been taken as trophies of war. We know that ISIS takes particularly Yazidis, Christians, the young women, turns them into, quote, wives or sex slaves. Is that doctrine within the Quran?
Of course it is. It is doctrine in the Quran. You can have slaves. Sometime, one of these girls, and I recall, she was 9 years old, that they used to rape her 20 times a day.
You've succeeded in rescuing a number of those women. Describe, without creating a vulnerability for the process, how you go about finding them and getting them out.
Through the relationship that we have with the Kurdish tribes, that we will be able to go cross the borders to ISIS territory, and we'll be able to save and rescue some of these girls back. We was able to locate 4 markets where they sell these girls. Most of them in Mosul and some of them in Syria. These girls have a different price, depend on her beauty, depend on her age, depend on she is virgin or not. So the price can go from $4,000 American dollars to $2,000 American dollars. This operation bankrupted our organization. But I will tell you something. I will sell my suit, my furniture, everything I own to get these girls out. And I have no regrets about it.
Up close with the Kurdish Peshmerga as they fight ISIS in northern Iraq. That's just ahead on War Stories. The autonomous region of Kurdistan is about the size of Texas. Located in the northeast corner of Iraq, it shares borders with Turkey, Syria, and Iran, and is rich in oil, natural gas, and extraordinary history.
The Kurds are the largest group of people in the world that don't have their own state.
Today, much of Kurdistan has been devastated thanks to the Syrian civil war and ISIS. Against all odds, the Kurdish Peshmerga are the only military force to consistently beat ISIS.
The Peshmerga are an incredible fighting force with very limited capabilities that they have. They certainly have the resolve and the will to fight, and they have been strong partners in the fight against ISIS.
Peshmerga means those who face death. Since ISIS invaded their territory in August 2014, they've fought nearly daily battles in a struggle to retake their land, and they've been doing so with little to no help from the U.S. This is the front line of the Mosul front for the Peshmerga, contending with ISIS right at the bottom of this hill. What do they have to fight with? Ancient AK-47s, a handful of M16s, T-55 tanks from the Soviet-era 50s. And why? Because we haven't given them the weapons they need to fight and win against ISIS. This is an American Humvee.
When ISIS came and Iraqi Army they left all this and the other one, they took it from ISIS.
We gave this to the Iraqi Army, and the Iraqi Army, the cowards, fled, and ISIS captured it from them, and then you captured it from ISIS.
The cowards left them, and the champions took them.
It would have been shorter if we'd just given it to you to begin with.
They can see the entire front line from here. Geographically in control of the entire area. The smoke is with the ISIS positions on. They have
yes, it's just enemy, Daesh.
Yeah?
Yes.
So the smoke that's out there on the horizon?
Yes.
It's from an airstrike?
Yes.
Yeah, through the coalition forces.
Do you have any friendly troops, any Peshmerga, forward west of that line right here?
You see the line over there, and that's a defensive trench.
Civilian.
There are no civilians in this place anymore.
As seen in these photos, the Peshmerga now have proof that ISIS is using chemical weapons against the Kurds, just as Saddam Hussein did when he was in power. This is one enormous refugee camp.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Leland Salah is the program manager of this refugee camp, sheltering thousands of Syrians. How many live in this camp, just this one camp?
Yeah, the number of the families, there are about 5,500 families, and the individuals around 30,000 individuals, yeah.
Everything that we've seen so far, there's an enormous burden on the government of Kyrgyzstan, the regional government.
Yeah, the huge burden is on the shoulders of the KRI government, yeah.
So American aid, government, goes to Baghdad, but it doesn't get here.
Yeah. And I think if they directly coordinate with the government of Kurdistan, it will be better.
The next crucial battle in Iraq will be the fight to liberate Mosul. Do you see Mosul being retaken in the near future?
I think it's going to be some time. Mosul has already started, and we're going to do this at a pace that allows the Iraqi security forces to be successful.
If Baghdad decides to attack Mosul to liberate it from Daesh. You could have another 500,000 refugees.
It doesn't matter how many comes here, we'll be at their service. Because Kurdistan has a huge heart. And whatever the Kurdish people have experienced, they understand the situation of the IDPs. That's why we're always supporting them.
Thank you.
Coming up, inside the worst terror attack on American soil since 9/11, and it's right here in Southern California. ISIS has wrought terror throughout the Middle East and Europe, with the recent carnage in Brussels, the slaughter in Paris, and the downing of a Russian airliner. ISIS also came to America with the largest terror attack since 9/11. These are some of the faces of people arrested on U.S. soil for helping to support or plot terrorism in the name of ISIS. Since 2014, more than 80 have been arrested. A teenage girl trying to leave Colorado to join ISIS in Syria. A man who ambushed a Philadelphia police officer. And a man who is now under investigation for his role in an ISIS-inspired mass shooting.
We are not doing enough on the home front to defeat ISIS.
If you look at the history of this city, we're largely a blue-collar town. We're on the suburbs of Los Angeles. We're about 215,000 people, and we're kind of a poor town.
Jared Bergwan is the chief of police in San Bernardino, California.
And this city in many ways has struggled for many, many years. The primary employer in town is government. We don't have a target like New York City and the World Trade Center.
Although no one knew it, there was a target. And on December 2nd, 2015, terror came to San Bernardino during a holiday party for 80 people at the Inland Regional Center.
At about 11 o'clock, there were two gunmen that burst through the doors of the conference center and they opened fire on the people that were in that room. The gunmen in this case were using semi-automatic assault rifle, AR-15 assault rifle style weapons. There was an immediate police response. The first San Marino Police Unit was there within 4 minutes of the 911 call. The suspects had escaped before the first units had arrived. 14 people were killed, 22 people were wounded.
Before their escape, the two shooters left behind an explosive device on the conference room table.
It was essentially a pipe bomb device that was attached to a remote control. At the end of the day, it didn't go off.
Was the device substantial enough that would have done considerable damage?
It definitely would have done some damage inside that room and probably would have caused some pretty significant injuries.
In the chaos following the shootings, a hunch by one of the witnesses led law enforcement to their first suspect, 28-year-old Syed Rizwan Farouk, who worked for the county as a food inspector. Earning $53,000 per year, his job also gave him a county-issued iPhone.
One particular person that was in the room that knew Mr. Farouk had told one of our officers that although the suspects were masked when they came back into the room, there was something about the suspect's body language and stature that he thought maybe it was Syed Farouk. He was at the event in the morning hours. About 10:30 in the morning, he left. A couple of employees had noted that he left, and they thought that was odd.
The real surprise was that the second shooter turned out to be Farouk's wife, 29-year-old Tashfeen Malik. Born in Pakistan to a wealthy family of landowners, Tashfeen Malik later moved to Saudi Arabia with her family. She returned to Pakistan in 2007 to study pharmacy here at this university in Multan. After returning to Saudi Arabia, Malik met Farouk on a dating website. Farouk went there to meet her in person in 2013. They were later married there and flew back to the United States together in July 2014. Malik was admitted to the country on a fiancé visa. America's current visa waiver program can allow extremists to slip in undetected. Many continue to exploit the fiancé visa for sham marriages or simply disappear after overstaying a visa.
30 countries in Europe, Somebody can just fill out a form, get on an airplane, and come to America for 90 days, and that makes us less safe. There are some gaping holes in the visa waiver program.
Clearly, it's the golden passport is the U.S.
Frank Salufo is the director of the George Washington Center for Cyber and Homeland Security.
We are looking at ways to tighten up the visa waiver program.
We do know that shortly before this incident took place, there was a Pledge of Allegiance from her to al-Baghdadi and ISIS. The information that we have would indicate that she also had a lot of that idealistic component when she came to the country.
The couple lived in this 1,100 square foot apartment in nearby Redlands with their baby daughter. Farouk's 62-year-old mother, Rafia, who worked in the billing department of a major California hospital, also lived with them. The morning of the massacre, they left their 6-month-old daughter in the care of Rafia.
Multiple shots fired.
Eventually, we saw him near the Redlands address. As soon as that marked unit had fallen in behind the suspect car, the back passenger, who turned out to be Tashfeen Malik, opened fire through the back window with an assault rifle at the officers behind.
All hell broke loose as the couple engaged in a wild gun battle with police wielding their AR-15 style rifles. The officers fired 380 rounds, while the shooters managed to get off 75. 2 police were wounded. Both Farouk and his wife were killed.
I don't know that we know exactly why they chose this event. These were folks that 6 months before had thrown a baby shower for him and had given him and his wife gifts for the birth of their child.
During the search of their apartment, alongside the baby toys, police discovered a bomb factory in the garage. There were 19 pipe bomb components and thousands of rounds of ammunition. The first seeds of the San Bernardino terrorist attack were sown in 2004, right here on this quiet street in Riverside, California. That's when a young Enrique Marquez moved into this house right next door to the family of Syed Rizwan Farouk. Farouk lived here with his mother, older brother Raheel, and 2 sisters. When they weren't working on cars together, Farouk indoctrinated Marquez into the ways of Islam. Soon, Enrique Marquez began to frequent this mosque in nearby Corona. In the years leading up to the shootings, Farouk and Marquez discussed radical Islam and listened to tapes of the radical cleric Anwar al-Awlaki.
Clearly, Anwar al-Awlaki, still to this day, is the Kevin Bacon of Islamist terrorism. So there's 7 degrees of connection to al-Awlaki in almost every case.
In 2012, Enrique Marquez bought explosive materials and 2 of the semi-automatic rifles that Farouk and his wife used in the San Bernardino shootings. Enrique Marquez actually filled out the information saying that they were for him. So, I mean, wouldn't that make it illegal?
Illegal in the sense of doing a straw purchase, absolutely. We know that back in 2012, they had discussed these other plots to attack a community college in our area and also launch an attack on a freeway here in the Inland Empire as well.
Dabik, the Islamic State's propaganda magazine, quickly gave a shout out to the terrorist couple.
Dabik 13 opens the first 2 pages of their Dabik magazine by lauding the San Bernardino shooters and gives them particular laud for being a husband and wife team that engaged in jihad and heeded the call of al-Baghdadi to attack the Crusaders in their homeland.
Another person in San Bernardino who came under FBI scrutiny was this man, Rashan Abbasi. He's a cleric here at the Dar al-Ulum Mosque, allegedly a haven for Islamic fundamentalists. In December, it was reported that the cleric had exchanged nearly 40 text messages with Farouk in the weeks leading up to the July 2015 terrorist attack on 2 military sites in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Federal officials dropped a legal fight with Apple after unlocking Farouk's government-issued iPhone. But despite the frenzy of texting, the cleric and his colleagues now claim they barely knew Farouk.
About a month ago, he stopped him. We did not think of anything of him because he's not really local.
The investigation into the San Bernardino attacks continues. In February, when the FBI raided the home of Farouk's older brother Raheel, thick manila envelopes and a computer were among the items removed from the premises. At the same time, Enrique Marquez sat in a jail cell, awaiting a July 2016 trial on terrorism charges. The FBI said that they didn't have any connection with domestic or foreign terrorist organizations.
You have ISIS, which has said, go do your attacks, do what you're going to do in our name, which has added a whole new fear in this country in many ways.
Why are so many Americans inspired to join ISIS? That's next on War Stories.
The threat posed by ISIS to the United States is growing in terms of scale and scope.
ISIS has been calling for attacks for well over a year against Westerners, particularly Americans. And they feel like, of course, they succeeded.
This past year, we saw 3 successful terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. We saw Tennessee and Chattanooga, obviously San Bernardino and Garland, Texas.
But why are more Americans heeding the Islamic State's call to the battlefield?
If there's a single profile, and unfortunately there isn't, it's the ideology.
And many analysts like to focus on the fact that ISIS is on Twitter and they're on Snapchat and they're on whatever else. And they put out glossy magazines and videos, but that's process. That process would not appeal to people unless the substance appealed to people. And the substance, again, is a literal understanding of Islam.
Many say the United States' efforts to counter ISIS's deadly narrative have been weak, unlike the successful campaigns used during World War II against Japan and Germany, and during the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
We had Radio Free Europe.
This station daily pierces the Iron Curtain with the truth.
We were countering communist and Soviet infiltration into the West by promoting capitalism, promoting freedom.
We've ceded the cyber battlefield to the adversary, and we need to do more to be able to push back. The same rigorous planning that goes into our warfighting efforts needs to go into our cyber efforts.
Salufo's program on extremism team at George Washington University tried to understand the recent surge in American jihadis. In December 2015, they released their report, ISIS in America, From Retweets to Raqqa. Seamus Hughes is one of the authors.
Since March 2014, we've had at least 80 arrests of people that have been charged with ISIS-related charges, and they run the gamut. They're old, they're young, they're rich, they're poor, black, white. There is no typical ISIS recruit. Over a 6-month period, we looked at about 300 accounts of American ISIS supporters to get a sense of the scene. And what we found was Twitter was the platform of choice.
Here are some of the images they found on social media.
So you have Generation Alaki, someone's account where they're just posting out quotes from Anwar al-Awlaki. The image of a lion is an avatar they use a lot online. It's an Islamic symbol of bravery.
I think one of the most interesting things was how brash everything is.
Sarah Jokes is a research associate.
This is a foreign fighter from, I believe, somewhere in Europe, and he has been with ISIS. This actually comes from Tumblr. There was a girl who posts over and over again. She's in love with this guy, and it's totally bizarre to see this in the frame of a terrorist organization.
ISIS has taken it to a whole new level. This is an engaged social media platform that can bring together like-minded individuals in the far-flung corners of the internet and the deep web.
People aren't just passively viewing the material. They're able to reach out to a radicalizer recruiter online and get that type of materials they need, or get that phone number in Turkey of who to call when you land.
Once they realize they got somebody, they'll go into what we call dark space in areas that we can't even monitor on the internet, even if we have a court order to understand what they're directing. So they're either inspiring or directing these small and medium-scale attacks, which are much more difficult to stop.
Encryption has made it nearly impossible for law enforcement to track terrorists who have gone dark on the web. To do so will require more cooperation from U.S. tech companies.
And we do need to build trust between Silicon Valley, D.C., and ultimately the American people. And I think it's this trust deficit that's impeding further cooperation, because yes, there's a freedom of speech issue, but you know what, there's also a terrorism issue here. So I mean, basically you have 3 options. We want to collect information to get a sense of who their networks are, so you don't want to instantaneously shut down all of these facilities. 2, we can actually start shutting down this information, and we need to do more there. And quite honestly, the American viewer, the Fox viewer, has a role here potentially to be able to identify, flag information. And Twitter and some of the other social media platforms are attempting to do this, but they're not doing enough. Third, we've got to push back. We've got to expose the bankruptcy of the ideology.
Coming up, meet some Muslims who are taking a stand against the Islamic State.
The delegitimization of ISIS can only be done by Muslims. Obama can't do it, Cameron can't do it, Merkel can't do it. It has to be people that are Muslim, that understand Islam.
The dilemma that facing Islam as a faith today is not the rising of the extremist, it's the silence of the moderate Muslims.
The bottom line is the Muslim world is dominated by theocrats, thugs, and dictators, what I call the Islamist mafia. And we can only defeat them if we start to take back the mantle of Islam.
The idea of the Islamic State is just a bad idea.
Born in Bombay, India, to a very conservative Muslim family, Asra Nomani came to the United States at the age of 4 and grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia.
It's a bad idea for the 21st century. It's a bad idea for Christians and Jews and Muslims who do not want to live according to this strict interpretation of Islam. And it's a bad idea for women.
Asra's goal of changing the hardline interpretation of Islam became a very personal one after the attacks on 9/11.
I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal on book leave. I went to Pakistan. There, my colleague from the Wall Street Journal, Danny Pearl, came to visit me. He went off for an interview from which he was then kidnapped and murdered by men who practice this interpretation of Islam that is very much the ideology of the Islamic State today. And what I realized very personally is that it's my duty as a Muslim, it's my duty to stand up against the ideology of extremism.
Today, she is a member of the Muslim Reform Movement started by Dr. Zuhdi Jasser.
The Muslim Reform Movement was started in December 2015. A group of us as Muslims stood together with this declaration. And what we are trying to do is be the change we want to see in the world. What we assert here is an idea of Islam in which we believe in peace, human rights, and secular governance.
So many of us who have been doing similar work, I called them, sent them notes, and said, listen, let's have a summit of all of us who really get this and want to take ownership for it, and we can make a 2-page declaration that is a firewall that clearly delineates for not only ourselves and Muslims, but for all of the West. How do you tell who are the Islamists that are working against us versus who are the reformers and the classical liberals, if you will, that are working with us?
December 4th, 2 days after the attacks at San Bernardino, the newly formed members of the Muslim Reform Movement held a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C.
We have seen Islam become a regressive interpretation because of so many of the sexist, intolerant, and even violent interpretations that the Saudi government has exported over the last 4 decades.
Following the press conference, Asra Nomani and the rest of the group took their declaration to the Saudi-financed Islamic Center of Washington.
One of our brave souls in the Muslim Reform Movement went like a stealth fighter across the courtyard to the front door of this mosque, and he taped to the front door of the mosque our declaration for the Muslim Reform Movement. Quickly enough, a staffer from the Islamic Center of Washington ripped down the declaration, but we had made our statement.
We stand against violent jihad. We stand against the idea of the Islamic State, not only ISIS, but all Islamic State. We stand against the caliphate. We stand for the equality of men and women. We stand for free speech. We believe ideas don't have rights, human beings do.
So what we have to fundamentally do is challenge those governments of Qatar, of Saudi Arabia, of Iran, of Pakistan. And we have to say, these ideas are not okay anymore for the 21st century, and that's what we're doing. And can I tell you what's happening is we are hearing from Muslims, and they are saying thank you to us. They are saying thank you for standing up with courage, because we fear challenging the status quo, and we are so grateful to you for being our voices in the world.
There's more war stories fighting ISIS just ahead.
The men and women who serve in the U.S. military make it the greatest fighting force in the world.
No doubt.
Look, it's also clear that radical Islamist ideology, like that spread by ISIS and other terror groups, are a major threat to the United States and other Western nations.
The question is this: will ending the menace require boots on the ground? And if so, whose troops will fill those boots?
Well, the war against ISIS isn't going to be won on a battlefield alone. We also have to defeat that ideology and allow no sanctuary for terrorists anywhere. More has to be done to protect our homeland.
I'm Leif Babbitt.
And I'm Oliver North. The fight against ISIS is a war story that deserves to be told. Good night.